Good morning. This is Coffee Talk, and I am Dr. Cheryl Field Smith, and I'm here with Phyllis Asinyandi. Did I get it right?
You did very good.
Okay. Please grab a cup of coffee and join us for this talk. Um, so, Phyllis, I want to start with just having you tell us a little bit about your homeschooling experience.
Okay. Um, I began homeschooling. When I began homeschooling, it wasn't like a dream of mine. It was sort of like, this is what I have to do because I see the situation for what it is, and it didn't look good for my son.
Mm.
I began homeschooling after he had had a year and a half of pre-kindergarten public school and a year of public school kindergarten. He had started first grade, and that's when I began to see that I don't think this is going to be a good experience for him. And it's really strange because it all happened within a week.
Oh,
Like before I sent him to school. I don't know. I just had this like I don't know how to describe it, but just like the feeling like, is this the best thing for him? Because I had sort of thought about homeschooling, but then I'm like, no, I'll give it a try. And during his first week of uh, public school, first grade at a magnet school, he was complaining a lot about being bored. I talked to the teacher about her plans for the year and the curriculum
mhm.
that she planned to use. And she was just very negative about the children. She was a young white teacher. And she was just like, well, these kids, they don't, your son may be complaining because I can tell that he's advanced, but these kids don't know this. And I'm going to have to keep going over things over and over. And she was talking about the children like they didn't have a lot of potential.
Mm,
So I knew that my son was advanced. At the time, I didn't know that he had autism, but
mhm.
I knew that he was gifted. I just knew
Right,
it.
right.
And From my own experience as a child with giftedness.
Mhm.
And so I was just like, hmm, then I tried talking to her again during that first week. Um, and she just didn't seem positive.
Mhm.
And I really didn't want him in a classroom with a teacher who wasn't positive or
Yeah.
who didn't act like she felt like children had unlimitless potential.
And this
So
is
I'm
in
like,
this is in Pennsylvania, right? Philadelphia?
no,
No,
actually Illinois.
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 Okay, okay,
Yeah, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, but I lived in
okay,
Chicago for about 22 years.
okay.
And so I'm like, well, I'm going to bring him home. And I had no idea what I was doing.
Oh wow, oh wow.
None whatsoever. But I'm like, I just felt like I could figure it out. And
Mhm.
so I learned about the Chicago Virtual Charter School. I enrolled him in a virtual charter school, realized that that was not really what homeschooling was, did research, and then I began homeschooling him.
Oh my goodness. And the last time I remember you saying that he's gone all the way through high school at this point, right? He's
Well,
did he
right, he's actually finishing up high
high
school
school? Yeah.
this year, and it's taken him longer because of well, I won't say that it's not because of his academic ability, but more so things that go along with having autism and struggles that he's had. And
Oh,
so finally, he's finishing up high school, and his plan is to do a 1 year art course, and then he said he might go to college.
okay.
Might.
Okay. Okay.
I had always thought it was a sure thing, but he dropped this bomb on me earlier this year
Oh wow. Wow.
about not really thinking that he was going to go straight to college.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So he has his own ideas. That's good though. That's
Yeah, he
good.
has his own ideas. My
Yeah.
son became a professional artist when he was 11.
Wow.
He sold his first pieces, and then he kind of like let go of the art at 14 because he developed other interests. But now he's come full circle and he's back with the art, and he's decided that that's what he wants to do with his life. Is he's a fine artist, but he says he'll do digital art to make money.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. So as a mother of a parent, I mean, as a mother and parent of a child who is on the spectrum, what do you think it's crucial for mothers to know?
Well, I think one thing that's crucial for them to know is that they can homeschool their child.
Mm.
I think a lot of people believe that because their child is on the spectrum or has special needs that they can't homeschool them because they think of special education teachers. They're like, well, I don't have those skills,
Mhm.
so how would I be able to give my child what they need? And I don't believe that it is a it's I don't believe it's a deterrent. It depends on the child. Um, it depends on the prognosis, which prognosis are not always correct. They weren't with my son.
Oh,
Um, and I think that just knowing that you can and that there's support if you do decide to homeschool your child.
their support. So where do what does one go to look for support to in homeschooling?
Well,
Uh,
it depends. It depends. It depends on where you live. In Illinois, we homeschool under. We don't have a homeschooling statute. We homeschool under the private school statute,
okay,
which means that every homeschool is its own private, uh, non-accredited school.
right.
And so the way that they deal with special needs children here, when you're homeschooling, you can get some services through the public school system. Now that is true in many states. In some states, it's not true. And so, for people really to get good information about that, I suggest looking at the HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association website. Look up their state law, and then when you go to the web page, you will see something that says special needs, and it will tell you how special needs children um, can get services
Oh,
through their school system. In some states, they cannot, and so then the parents would have to do everything on their own. But my son received support through the public school system and also through private therapies.
okay, okay. Wow.
Mhm.
So how would you say homeschooling a child who has autism different from homeschooling other children?
I would say that it's different in that you don't just have to deal with the academic aspect of schooling. You have to make sure that their other needs are met because to me that's all part of their education. So if a child is on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, and they need speech therapy to deal with either becoming verbal, because some
Mhm,
children on the spectrum are not verbal or
mhm,
they're not speaking, then that's part of their education. If they need help with social skills,
mhm,
which most children on the spectrum have social deficits, that's part of their education.
mhm,
If they need some children on the spectrum, um, they develop fine motor skills at a slower rate. Occupational therapy is part of their education. And so you have to make sure that they're getting those things along with the academics, along with what I call life skills.
right.
I spent all children need life skills, but
Mhm.
um, I believe that children on the spectrum, they need life skills on steroids. I mean, because
Okay.
some things just are not apparent to them. Like part of being on the spectrum is not picking up on nonverbal or body language or not picking up
Mhm,
on social cues. And
mhm.
there's hope for that also.
Okay.
But then I also think about children who are not like my son. My son is he is highly intelligent. He is also I don't know how to explain. He compensates for a lot of things with his intelligence.
Okay.
Then there are kids who are on the spectrum who are, I would say many of them are highly intelligent too, but they might be non-speaking. So then some parents will be like, well, how can, um, I teach my child if they're non-speaking?
Mhm.
Well, it's interesting because I've been around a lot of kids who are on the spectrum, and just because a child is non-speaking doesn't mean that they don't understand.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents I've seen with children who are non-speaking, they have like they do something called applied behavioral. It's some kind of therapy that their children have where the therapist comes into the home, etc. To
Mhm.
me, all of that part is part of your child's education. And
Mhm.
when you're working, and when these professionals are working with your children, what I did a lot of times is that I actually asked if I could sit in. There were places where my child went to therapy where I could look at what they were doing through a window. The
Mhm.
child couldn't see out, but the parents could see in. And so, I learned a lot of things from working with professionals that would help my child at home.
Very good. That's good. Do you have an idea of how many children are on the spectrum in the United States?
Well, I was looking at the at reports from the CDC, which is what inspired me to do the coffee talk, and I had read that there were 1 out of 54 8-year-old children that were on the spectrum.
Wow.
And I think they chose the age of 8 because at that point many children have been diagnosed. Their diagnoses are coming at earlier and earlier ages now.
Mm.
My son got a pretty late diagnosis, and part of it was because he is cognitively gifted. And
Mm.
so they said like he just a lot of the things he masked and he compensated, but then as he got older you began to see the deficits and behaviors and
Mm. Mm.
so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, why is there a need for specific instructions on homeschooling a Black child on the autism spectrum?
Because I think that from my experience and from other parents' experiences that I've spoken to, many times if their child is in uh, the public school system, there's a lot of discouragement about home pulling their child out to homeschool them because they either think that the parents aren't, I guess, smart enough, or you know,
Mm.
there's just a what I got from my experience was like, you really don't know what you're doing. He would be better off here. Okay. I
Wow.
mean, I
Wow.
mean, it wasn't said in
Yeah.
those with those direct words, but it was implied.
Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
was like, okay, but what I'm seeing here, and I did try the school system even after first grade, mainly because I was a single mother. And there was a need to work. And
Yeah.
so, I tried the school system a few different times at a few different grade levels, and it never worked out for my son. I'm not saying that it doesn't for some children. I
Mhm.
mean, some parents are happy, with the school system, and I have nothing against public schools.
Right.
It's just that in my son's situation, it didn't work out. And I was a very active, involved parent
Mhm.
because I had to be. I was
Mhm.
I was I was always being called up to the school for some reason or
Oh my
another.
goodness.
So I had to be there. And so I
Right.
figured out, well, I'm not going to be able to hold a traditional job anyway.
Mhm.
So I need to figure out how to make money from home so I can homeschool my son.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did you end up doing? How did you balance that? Because I imagine there's quite a few single people wondering how do you homeschool in their single status?
Well, when I first left my job, when my son was 6 and about to go into first grade, it wasn't, I hadn't decided to homeschool at that point, but I had decided that I wanted to try to work from home just so I could be more available to him. Like, if he's in school and they're having a program or they need parent volunteers or something like that, I can be available if I work from home.
Mhm.
So I left my job. I was working at the University of Chicago at the time, and I started doing medical transcription from home because that was part of like what I did on my job.
Mhm.
And so I started with that, and the recession came, and I lost my contracts, and there was a lot of sort of upheaval in my life financially. But eventually, I figured out how to make the money thing work, and
Okay.
how to like not like put all my eggs in one basket,
Mhm.
to diversify with my self-employment. So, at one point I was doing transcription. Another point I was like evaluating transcription applications. At one point, I honed in on my writing skills, and I started writing online articles for the internet. And so I did a lot. I did a lot. I did a
Yeah,
lot of different things.
that's really great. Um, so I'm curious about, you talked about the life skills that you have to teach in addition to the academics when you have children on the well, just children in general, but specifically for children on the spectrum. But are there specific African American, because you're African American, that there are specific different life skills that you have to teach?
Um, yes, and I would say that there has to be a heavy emphasis. Like a lot of times, people who have kids on the spectrum, they'll say, "Well, just don't worry about certain behaviors." But I think that you can't do that if you have a black child, especially as they get older, because some behaviors of some people, not
Mhm.
everyone on the spectrum, I think could cause your child to get literally killed. you
Oh,
know I mean, if they're uh behaving in a certain way, like I had to emphasize to a lot to my son, even at a younger age, before he reached his teens, about how to behave if the police, you
mhm,
know um if you were out and something happened and the police stopped you,
mhm,
because for him it was different. He's not a child on the spectrum who is non-speaking. He
mhm,
has a huge vocabulary, but
mhm,
he has this issue that when he is stressed or upset, he would say, "Well, I lose my words,"
mhm,
meaning that he could not respond.
mhm,
So I would have to emphasize to him about how to behave, what to do with your hands.
mhm,
Even the thing about, well, maybe you should wear a bracelet or something that lets people know
mhm,
that you're on the spectrum, or some kind of ID tag.
mhm,
I had incidents where my son would be in public. This is when he was younger, before some of his behaviors became under control, where people would just be like, he might, do something strange or whatever, or what looks strange to people, say in the grocery store. Maybe, and all it was like, a lot of people on the spectrum have sensory processing disorder, where they're very sensitive to sounds and lights, and
mhm,
lots of activity going on around them.
mhm.
He might just like stop and sit on the floor. That's
Okay.
what he used to do when he was younger. Like, it just kind of made him, um, be immobile,
And
or,
that was because it was too
it
much
was just overstimulated.
overload. Yeah.
I've seen kids, scream. You know,
Okay.
I've seen kids where if somebody bumped them, they had like a violent reaction
Yeah.
because of their oversensitivity to touch and
Right.
those kinds of things. And so to me, it's like you really have to work with someone about behaviors,
Mhm,
until that child really, really gets it.
mhm,
Because the responses to when our children do things isn't the response that, say, a white child will get when they do things,
yes.
certain things. And so to
Mhm,
me, that was always a big issue. It's like, I have to find a way to help him to be able to regulate himself,
mhm, mhm,
and so I think that's a big part of the life skills, is teaching them how to behave, um, when they're in certain situations.
mhm,
Like when you're at home, you can, like, you know walk around in circles. You can, flap your arms. You can do whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but in public, uh, you know,
Mhm.
behaviors have to be modified. And
Mhm.
that's for children, I would say, who are able to modify behaviors. Some it's more difficult than others.
Mhm.
And but I think it's something that can be worked on. Another thing that I had to do with my son, and I find this with many parents, is a lot of children who are on the spectrum. They don't have stranger danger. They don't understand that when they're young,
Yeah.
and that's a very scary thing. I had incidents with my son that you would not believe,
Oh my
but
goodness.
somehow God worked it all out and protected him.
Right. Right.
So and then as my son got older, and I think this is true for all kids, um, when they get older, you have to start teaching them about, I called it life lessons.
Mhm.
And he loved that. He still does, and he's a young adult now. But he would love to for me to tell him these stories about life, my life, other people's life, that he could apply to real life
Oh
situations.
wow. Mhm.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
another thing I found too is that many kids who are on the spectrum, it's almost like they have this it's sort of like a naivete or an innocence about life. And
Mhm.
that's another thing that I had to work with my black child on. I mean, he seemed to have this attitude like, he just I don't know, he's just a very caring person. And
Mhm.
he would think when he was younger, no matter how many stories we read or movies we watch, that the people in the world were like him. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it took him a long time to get that lesson.
Oh wow.
You know,
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's a hard one to learn.
it's a very difficult one. It took him a long time to really get it, and
Yeah.
I think finally he got it. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Is there any specific support available for homeschooling a Black autistic child?
Well, I would say that the support that's available is something that you have to search out. Just like me, when I first pulled my son out of school, I didn't realize he could still get speech therapy through the public
Mhm.
school or social skills group. At one point, they had. So it's something that you have to seek out.
Mhm.
I would say that one really good source, and it's not a homeschooling resource, but just if you join some type of group for parents of kids who have autism, you
Mhm.
will find out about a lot of the resources that are available, say within your community.
Mhm.
Or I was able to help many parents who didn't know things like, even though they might have health insurance through their job, if they contacted the Department of Human Services in their city or whatever, they might could still get Medicaid for their child that's on the spectrum.
Oh,
And
wow.
so if you have Medicaid along with your health insurance through your job or whatever, it would cover many things that maybe your insurance alone would not.
Well, that's important.
Yeah, it's really important because a lot of times, say your insurance might have something like, okay, 20 visits of speech therapy. Okay, well, your child who's on the spectrum might need a lot more than that. Where
Mhm.
with Medicaid, the speech therapy that I could get for my child was limitless, meaning there was no limit on how many visits per year.
Right, right. Oh, that's good.
You know,
That's so important. That's very important. So have you found, are there homeschool support groups specifically for Black children who, well, families, Black families with children with autism?
I never found any. In fact, it was very hard to just find a special needs homeschool support group. Period.
Mm.
I never found one. At one point, my son was going to a homeschool support group for gifted children because along with his autism. He's twice exceptional, and I'm sure you've heard of
Mhm.
that term.
Yes, yeah.
And so he was going to a homeschool support group for gifted children, and that was probably the best fit that we found. The only issue that I had with it was that like we were the only black family there.
Right.
And so what I started doing was thinking outside of the box. Like, okay, if I can't find a homeschool support group that's a good fit for him, let's try using community resources so he can get his socialization.
Mhm.
So we did a lot of things like programs at the library.
Okay.
Um, he would go and play computer games and chess with the kids from public school. So sometimes there was a one point in his life, like every day, we would be at the library to meet the kids, and he was able to develop some friendships.
Right.
And he was also able to teach kids to do things that he knew how to do very well, like play Roblox and Minecraft and chess.
Oh, wow.
And he got to be known as like oh well, where is he? So he can help us to get better with our games or whatever.
Right, right.
So I decided that everything did not have to be via a homeschool support group.
Mhm.
There were community resources. Like if you live in a large city, sometimes you can find these things. My son did a lot of classes through the Park District in
Oh,
Chicago. I mean, he did dance class. Um, he played basketball. He wanted to play baseball. And
mhm.
so all of these things were through community resources. And I
Right.
felt like it was good for him
Mhm.
because it helped him with his social skills.
Right, right. Wow. So it sounds like being a parent, homeschooling a child on the spectrum, you may have to draw from multiple sources to find something that works for you, for your child.
You will definitely have to draw from multiple sources, and you also have to learn how to do research.
Mhm.
And that was the biggest thing that I found that was helpful for me. And it's just like a simple thing, Google was my
Yeah,
best
yeah.
friend, because that's how I discovered many things.
Wow.
It wasn't through a list someone gave me
Yeah.
or told me about. A lot of things were through the community. Even my son went to like a summer camp one year for children with special needs. That was through the Park District.
Oh, wow.
Um, no one told me about that. We just happened to be at the Park District one day. I think I saw a poster or something,
Mhm.
and I'm like, oh, this would be good for him, and he
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. You
Wow.
know.
Wow. That's awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I'd like to share that as far as the laws go concerning the homeschooling and obtaining services through the public school. That's something that anyone who wants to homeschool a child who has autism or any other special need should be well acquainted with.
Mhm.
Again, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, HSLDA. Another thing that I think parents should know is that your child is not necessarily going to progress further or faster because they're in school.
Mm.
It's a decision that one has to make, whether that is the best environment for the child. And another thing that I believe parents need to know is that it's not good to isolate. I have met many parents whose black parents whose child is on the spectrum, and they will isolate because maybe they feel that there's some type of stigma that's
Mm.
associated with autism, and there is in
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
some communities.
Mhm.
But there are also people when you explain to them, um, they will help your child even in a situation that's not created for children who have special needs or whatever.
Mm.
My son was able to participate in a lot of things when I explained, well, this is his behavior when this or that happens,
Mhm.
and this is how I deal with it. I found many people who were willing to be accommodating,
That's so good.
even though, so I think it's important to know not to isolate, and also um, even with online Facebook groups and places like that, sometimes you can make connections with other parents who are homeschooling their children, their Black children who are on the spectrum.
Okay.
Um, I met people like that through African American Homeschool Moms. That's a Facebook group. And some people through my own group, African American single parent homeschoolers.
Mhm.
So it's important to make those connections online
Yeah.
and in person in the community through professionals, and all of these things put together can help you to be able to homeschool your child.
Yeah, that's really important. Good news. Good information.